Cubo undertook. Sorry. Hello. That's real. So Cubo undertook the design, scripting, and distribution of the survey link. This year marked a departure from the previous Excel format. So as part of this roundtable, there's discussion to be had around that and how you found that new data collection mode. With Cubo having collected the data, it was shared with us, so that's MEL Research. We reviewed it when necessary, went back and undertook some sense checks with HEIs directly, and then we undertook the analysis. And in total this year, 68 institutions provided at least some data, although not all institutions provided all elements, and some didn't provide much at all. So headline figure, total commercial income as reported by 49 institutions for 2020-21 was 638.5 million. That gives a mean commercial income of 13 million per institution and a median average of 10.6 million. This is notably lower than the figures reported in 18-19, when there was a total commercial income from 36 institutions, so almost a third fewer, of 835 million and a mean average of 23.2 million. So, roughly double, roughly half this year. The top 10 institutions reported 330 million of commercial income, which equates to 52% of the total. That's a slight decrease from 57% in 18-19. I think, for all of you on the call, really, the fact that commercial incomes seem to have fallen is probably not unexpected. Both HESA and the Irish Universities Association highlighted this back in 2021. HESA particularly flagged that conferencing was likely to be a big loss, and that is what we've seen. So in 2019, conferencing made up around 7% of incomes for the HIs that participated in that year. And this year it's around 2%, so a big drop. And again, catering activities as well, and that including catering within residences, that's also seen a reduction. So this was around 22% of income in 18-19, only 11% in 2020-21. As a result, residential incomes have actually increased as a proportion of overall incomes, accounting for 84%, but obviously in real terms, it's fallen as well. In terms of catering, looking at catering, so total catering income from 37 institutions that reported that data was 73.7 million, although not all reported all aspects. The average gross profit being achieved on catering was 53% this year, lower than 58% in 18-19. Catering income within residences was 21.7 million, or 29% of the total activity, whilst 52 million, or 71%, was made up of general or combined catering income. Whilst those overall numbers, the overall income figures are reduced, the proportions in terms of the split between in residence and general or combined roughly follow what occurred in 18-19. So 18-19, 19% of activity was residential catering compared to 29% this year, and 81% was general or combined compared to 71% this year. So there's been a bit of a shift, but the broad proportions are still, roughly there. The top 10 income generators from catering in 2021 also had a higher margin on average. So initially I'd flagged that this might be due to their buying power or just more footfall, maybe they're in the city centres, that type of thing. Joe actually raised a really good point about the fact that they may actually have it as much more of a focus on income. So if they're actually earning more from catering, possibly they're focusing on it more as an income stream and thus are aiming for higher margins and therefore getting them. So just moving on to look at an index of prices across institutions. So where costs can be compared to 18-19, there's been an incremental increase in prices for a range of more standardised items, and I'll move on in a second to talk about some very standardised items. But the average price of a single laundry wash was $270 in 2018-19, it's $282 this year. Portion of chips is, on average 155, 18-19, 167 this year. So prices are going up. That could be due to inflationary pressure. It could be due to some slightly different participants providing data, and that's one of the things that we want to get a much better handle on in the coming years around actually what data we're using for benchmarking at this kind of level. But also we need to remember that, not all quarter pounders are equal, and, the range of barista coffee is wide and varied. So we look specifically here at two highly standardized products, so Coca-Cola and Mars Bar. The average price for Coca-Cola has actually remained the same if you take the average, but we've got a much bigger sample, so it's kind of misleading. What we've looked at really is the range of prices. So that range has tightened from a 90 pence range in 1819, so moving from 80p up to £1.70. They're the green bars on the left. And then in 2020-21, if you look at the grey bars, the cheapest Coke is £1 and the more expensive £1.80, given a range of 80p. Basically what we're saying is the bottom of the range has risen by 20 pence, which is around 25% more expensive at its cheapest. And the same is true of Mars bars. Again, it's 25% more expensive to buy the cheapest Mars bar now than it was in 2018-19. So I think we are seeing upwards price creep when we look at the range of pricing. In terms of staff costs, so this year we did actually capture additional data on staffing costs for porters and for security staff specifically. Where year-on-year comparisons can be made, the average rates of pay are higher, so that's for catering staff and cleaning staff. The average for cleaning staff in 1819 was £9.34 and is now £10.2. And the previous average hourly rate for catering staff was £9.50 and is now £9.61. As might be expected, London wages are higher, so average rates of pay across all those four roles within London-based institutions average at £12.25, in the South £9.94, the Midlands and Wales £9.83, and the North and Scotland £9.73. So London's significantly more expensive, as we might expect, as the London living wage, that type of thing as well. In terms of conference income, so as noted at the outset, really, conferencing income in 2020-21 was lower than that recorded in 1819. The total across the 30 institutions who provided data in 2021 was 10.5 million, significantly lower than the 54.5 million generated across only 26 institutions, so 4 fewer institutions in 1819. The average earnings per institution this year was 350,000, again, significantly down on the 2.1 million in 1819. Although, as you can see, this chart is really quite heavily skewed by one institution. So a better measure is probably the median income this year, which is 99,000, so even lower still. Conference income is asked about in terms of both dedicated and non-dedicated conference facilities. The proportion of revenue generated from dedicated conference facilities has increased slightly since 2018-19, when it accounted for 44%. This year it accounts for 53%, so 5.6 million of that 10.5. And residences income. So total residential income of 535.5 million was reported across 37 institutions. The average income was 14.5 million, the median income 12.3. These figures are lower in comparative terms than those reported in 1819, when there was a total residential income of 532.3 million. So actually lower in real terms in 2018-19, but that was only over 30 institutions. The average income in 1819 was 17.7 million, again compared to 14.5 million this year from residences. The largest institution in 1819 reported a residential income of 61.9 million, and the smallest 29,000 pounds. In 2021, the largest institution reported a residential income of 39.4 million and the smallest 422,000. So the smallest gone up, but it's likely a different institution. We haven't seen the kind of prior data at a granular level. The largest institutions gone down by around a third. And perhaps unsurprisingly, that's reflected in the occupancy figures, which are much lower than those recorded in 1819. 1819, the average occupancy was 95%. In 2020-21, 40 institutions reported data, and the average occupancy was only 81%. The highest level reported this year was 99%, but the lowest was only 49%. Anecdotal evidence provided in some of the responses suggests that some institutions were provided students with a refund or for obviously for part tenancies as a result of just no face-to-face teaching taking place. And that is supported as well by data from HESA and Ord. Their estate management report highlights, one of the most serious impacts of COVID during the year was the impact it had on income in the residential sector. Residential income significantly reduced as institutions typically had to give refunds to students for a proportion of the year. So I don't think there are any surprises really in kind of occupancy figures. In terms of what people occupying the rooms actually get, 49 institutions provided information on that this year. The most common amenities were internet, utilities, personal contents insurance, and residence life, which we have a broader section on later. No institutions included a TV itself in the bedroom as part of the rent, although around a quarter did cover the license where it was relevant. Data is not available to compare from previous years, so this is possibly something to keep an eye on, particularly as demand for luxury accommodation either increases or changes, I guess, depending on how the international student market reacts. And that is something that was raised last question, something that we may end up covering in future variations of this survey, the kind of balance of international students and how they're interacting with halls and using them. In terms of rental rates and how much people are actually paying for this, comparing the data to 1819 figures for self-catered rooms, we don't have data for twin and doubles, but there's an increase of £16 a week in average rent for studio rooms and ensuite rooms, and an average increase of £5 a week for standard rooms. These represent an increase of £9, £11, and an increase of 9%, 11%, and 4% respectively. So again, self-catered room rates are going up, and the same is true of catered rooms. So there's been a £39 increase in ensuite weekly rents. This is the modal average. £39 increase in ensuite weekly rents and £26 in non-ensuite rents since 1819. Again, we don't have data for twins. These equate to increases of 20% and 16% respectively. This data, both for catered and non-catered rooms, broadly aligns with Unipol's accommodation cost survey, the latest iteration of which is 2021 data. They had an average increase of 16% since their 2018-19 data. It's slightly skewed towards private providers though, so we need to take into account, but it does kind of correlate with our data, which suggests prices are going up across the sector, which again probably isn't a huge surprise to you guys. In terms of sports, so 26 institutions provided data on income and memberships, although not all provided it on both. Total income from sport in 2020-21 was 18.7 million, with an average income of 720,000. The largest institutional income was 2.7 million. Based on figures for October 2021, which was what was asked in the survey, the total membership across all institutions was 143,393 members, so 144,000 members across all institutions. 76% of those were students, 5% were staff, and 19% were members of the public. This gives an average income per member of £130. We did delve into pricing information a little bit more though. So that was captured based on the cheapest and the most expensive sporting memberships offered. What was included in sports membership differs widely depending on the facilities available, type of person accessing the facilities, and the time at which they wanted to access them in some cases as well. And some institutions reported, having a monthly or annual subscription rate, and there were discounts available. But taking that into account as far as we can, in general, prices for staff and members of the public are typically higher than for students. The overall average price for the cheapest sports membership was about £70, and the average for the most expensive was about £230 a year. This year, we also added new questions on Residence Life. These programs, again, come in a variety of different formats and include various elements, and there's quite a wide range of data here. I think one suggestion we would have is to use this as a starting point for future and kind of measure this more as we move forward to understand impacts of it and also how it's changing. It's quite a new kind of introduction. I know that Cubo are doing work on Residence Life, and there was a Residence Life conference recently. So it'd be interesting, I guess, when that's settled, to know a bit more about that and how we could maybe work some of that into the survey to improve the data we capture. But with the data we have, 36 institutions said that they provided a Residence Life programme for their students, of whom 22 institutions actually provided data on their programme. So about roughly half of the institutions we spoke to actually have one, and around a third have given us some data on it. In total, those 22 institutions spent 11.4 million on these programs, which gives an average of 517,000 per institution, but a median average, again, there is an outlier here, so a median average of 299,000. The average cost per head to deliver Residence Life was a mean average of £34 and a median average of £14. Soft FM, again, this was a new addition in 2020-21. 47 institutions provided data around how they operate their Soft FM services. Cleaning and portering are largely managed in-house, with 60% of institutions managing cleaning in-house and 86% managing portering in-house. Laundry, however, is much more likely to be contracted out, so 79% contract laundry out. Far fewer institutions actually provided data on their spend on some of these things. So cleaning staff cost expenditure was on average 1.6 million across 36 institutions. Portering staff costs were 440,000 across 19 institutions. And laundry service spend, because it was contracted out, was around £13,000 on average. However, it's worth flagging these are new questions, and given the additional cleaning requirements of COVID and the likely drop-off in laundry spend due to less conferencing, that type of thing, these may not be quite where these figures settle in coming years. And I think it's an area we should look at. And again, finally, new questions were asked about security provisioning in 2020-21. Again, 47 institutions provided data around security management. 55% managed their security in-house, 30% using a blend of in-house and contract, and the remainder, so 15%, operate either fully contracted or a different type of model, a kind of a bespoke model. 31 institutions provided data around the cost of their security. In total, they spent 52.4 million on residential and campus security, making the average cost per institution 1.7 million. More money is spent on campus security, which accounts for around 70% of security costs, and residential security, obviously, for 30% of those costs. And that brings us to the end of kind of a fairly kind of brief presentation on the top lines of the data. Is there anything anyone wants to raise immediately? Can I stop sharing? This is familiar.
I will make the comment on the last group. We're relatively quiet on the comments. And as I say, we are going to spend a bit of time working this through. So we don't think you won't escape, and particularly I may corner you at Cubo conference in July, which of course you're all coming to. No, but genuinely, we are going to take a bit of time. So if you don't have comments today, then we'd be very happy to take either by email or calls elsewhere if people want to do them. Well, there's a chat there. Now, Trudy's had to leave.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. Shall I?
Yeah, if there are no comments at this point, should we move on to future plans?
Oh, hold on. Someone's just banging on my door. Hopefully they'll go away, but if they keep banging, I may have to just pop off. Can you all see that again?
Yes.
Yep.
Perfect. Okay. So as Joe talked about really in his introduction, Cubo want to develop this survey to be something that is sector leading in the insight it gives. And at this point in the process, there are, which is relatively early in fairness, there are 3 key strands to this at the moment. So one is working with an independent agency who can kind of dedicate time to the survey design, the tabulation, the analysis. The second will be ensuring that that analysis and the data set as a whole are accessible to those who contribute. And the third will be reviewing the study questions themselves, and this will probably actually come first, potentially adding some in and potentially removing some. It's about making the study, as useful to you as possible, and so that you use it. I'll quickly cover off each of these in the next couple of slides, but it's early days, as you say, and we will come to the questions last. I think that's the element where there's probably most input from you guys. So we'll talk through the first 2 first, and we'll have a little talk about the study itself, hopefully. So Cubo's plan is to work with an independent agency. It may or may not be MEL research at this point, but in general, the overall advantages of this include specialist data collection software. So I know that this year you use SurveyMonkey, and I'm not here to disparage SurveyMonkey, but it doesn't necessarily have the facilities that commercial survey software has. So we can support, or other agencies are available, can support with the ease of completion across multiple users, being able to tabulate data end to end, and having to basically automating calculations within the survey itself, so that we're not reliant on, essentially humans to make decisions around how the data was analysed and processed. We can set all that up within the survey, do it once, thoroughly check it, and then it's just done. And the data that's produced at the end is correct, complete, and has been sense checked as part of the survey, ideally, which means we'll spend more time analysing it than cleaning it. And having a single and consistent database will mean much better year-on-year comparisons. And we can also account for different institutions coming and going. There are a couple of ways to do that. One would be to have kind of almost a core group, which we use for benchmarking. Another would be to just kind of bring in organisations of similar sizes and use those as the benchmarking numbers year on year, but there are pros and cons to each, and there may also be others. The other element is access to comparative data. So from MEL's perspective, we also undertake Unipol's accommodation cost survey. It's not done as frequently, but it does mean that we know exactly what questions are asked and how. And if we did want to peg some data for comparability, we could use those exact same questions, those types of things. Again, other agencies may well do other surveys for other people. This is more about an independent agency generally. And that is really relevant in that independent third parties can provide reassurance to the wider sector and help develop Cubo as a thought leader around this data. It's not being done in-house, it's being done by an independent third party with no kind of vested interest in what the data says particularly. In terms of the second point, we also want to widen the accessibility of the data, and part of this is the format you receive it in. So currently you get the raw data in Excel, and it's absolutely fine for us to continue sharing that as well, if that's what some people like, and some people do really like getting into the raw data, which is great. But we're also, in addition to that, proposing to develop a data portal. which Cubo members can have a login to and have much more freedom over how you analyze the data, but in a way that doesn't require you or members of your team to be kind of data whizzes. It's a much more visual way. There's no requirement to use things like pivot tables. We can agree with you a range of pre-built filters, region, size, mission group would maybe one, income levels, with you all, and this can also develop and grow as the survey moves forward, and as people send requests, we can build that into the portal and it be kind of a living thing. The other benefit is we can also centralize historic data in there year on year to make those annual comparisons easier, both in terms of overall figures, which I've done in today's presentation, but also giving the ability to review real change based on specific institutions much more easily, if that is something that is of interest. And the final strand we're looking at is how the questionnaire actually works. Is the questionnaire itself and the data being collected fit for purpose so that the data is useful and used? As a start for 10, it would be really good to understand from you how you use the raw data, anything you think is missing or anything that's absolutely critical that's already in there. What do you most value about the data? Is it, or what data would be most valuable to you? So is it data that's per student, so you can kind of accurately compare across institution, or per bed or things like that? Or actually, are you more interested in those bigger trends that are happening? Obviously, we can potentially look at doing both, but it's understanding what measurements you use and the kind of comparative points you would be making most often. We're also, I guess, considering using this as a vehicle to collect more topical or opinion-based information on the wider sector. So both directly related to the survey itself, to explain any trends or to get further detail on the bigger picture that's happening around institutions. So residential life, for instance, is probably an interesting one, like how is it fitting into the strategy, over how many years are you building residential life into cost bases, that type of thing. But also potentially more wide-ranging questions which could be used to just add value across the group. And it may be that what we do is set up a period just before the survey goes live where individuals can suggest questions more generally that they like to go into the survey, that information can then be shared around it in potentially quite a quick and dirty way if needed. But it's about delivering insight at speed, really. So really, at this point, it'd be just great to hear any initial thoughts on the proposals for how it moves forward, really, or your experience of it this year, or in general. So I will again stop presenting and open the floor to you guys.
Yeah, it would be really good to have some feedback. Is that Ian Spencer, LSE? Thank you.
It is. Sorry, sorry I've had my camera off. I've been listening intently, but I've been trying to multitask at the same time, which, being a man, I didn't do very well, I'm afraid. Sorry. Do you want me to start off and give where I'm coming from? Would that help a discussion? I think that it's really crucial that we do develop benchmarking in Cubo, and that we try over a period of 5 years to get some common benchmarks that we're all looking at, that we can compare each other, our performance against other institutions. Now, the obvious one for us is rent levels. What are institutions in London charging for, say, a single ensuite room or a single catered room? Or for a twin room, and we can compare that not just within London but also within the regions. We're also really interested in occupancy statistics as well. So what percentage occupancy does each institution run at, and conversely, what is the void rate, the empty property percentage that we have? I think the crucial one that we don't have at the moment, that we're at LSE we're really after, is the operating cost per bed space of our residences, and within that we're looking at non-catered bed spaces, and we're looking at catered bed spaces as well. And in our stock, because we've got such a wide range of stock, a lot of which is very old, our operating costs move massively depending on how much maintenance we have to do on the building. So particularly having operating costs per bed space within London would be something we're really after. The other thing I'm aware of in terms of benchmarking is the definition of what is a void bed space, or what do you put into your operating costs, because people seem to do different things. So I think there will be some work that we need to do on what we define each of the categories, what you put in and what you exclude. I think the residential life one is an interesting one. I'm getting kickback internally about what is residential life? What's the definition of it? Why are you spending all this money on social activities? And how do you compare with other institutions in the sector in terms of how much per student, per head, are you spending on residential life activities? And crucially, how do you prove that this is successful? Is that, and the way we prove it is by an annual satisfaction survey of our students. Now, I'm not sure if this is going a bit too far, but we do an annual satisfaction survey, and we get about 50% of our students filling it in, between 50 and 55%. So it's a really healthy number. More than 2,000 students a year tell us stuff. And we ask 3 key questions. One is, are you enjoying your stay in residences? And we get like 90% saying yes, they are, they're having a good time. We say, do you think your hall offers value for money? And then would you recommend it to another LSE student? And I'm not sure whether Cuba want to go down this road, but whether we want to run our own survey that we ask Cuba members to run amongst our student population, and we sort of ask them 3 key questions so we can compare across the country what students think of that. But that's it. There were my thoughts as Elliot was speaking.
I'm going to step in here and just a couple of observations on the final one. Absolutely, one of the things we would love to do is do some direct student research, but it's a different beast from this. In as much as, and one of the things we are talking about is whether we actually have a benchmarking, a customer service stroke benchmarking. So NPS was one of the things someone's talked about, and I keep on forgetting his name from UEA, but anyway, we're talking about, and the idea of getting people together to talk about, are there, exactly what you've just said, some core questions that we could run. Now, there is a problem of apples and pears, as you know, that actually levels of satisfaction may be nothing to do with things that we do, and etc. But and actually often these things that is benchmarking against yourself and how you progress each year against these things is arguably more critical. But there's going to be I think there is going to be a conversation very much about that and how we do that. Now, it may sit sideways to this, because if you're going directly to students, it's a different beast. It's also, how do we do it in a cost-effective manner and don't repeat things? But I think one of the things is there will be a round table about that very subject. The other one, just on the price comparison, we're just going to have to be careful on cartel and anti-competitive behaviour, specifically around that. When you talk about different cities, it's probably okay when you average it up. But if you talk about King's versus UCL versus whoever else in London, it may well start causing us problems. So you're right, it's incredibly useful information, and it's not to run a cartel. It's actually probably in most of our cases is making sure that we're fair in the market. So ironically, it's probably as much that than anything else, but it certainly wouldn't be interpreted in that way. But thank you for your points, and some really useful points there, but just a couple of observations there.
Can I just dive in as well, Ian? I guess I'm really interested in the definitions question, because I think it's something, looking at the data that comes up, is not an issue for me, but I look at it and go, yeah. I guess the question I'd put to you and to the rest of the call is, sorry, if anyone was here at the start, that's my cat, she's very cool, would be, would members be amenable to Cubo, probably via some workshops and roundtables things, but almost setting out a definition? This is the definition we are using, but there will be some institutions who don't report in that way or don't measure in that way, and they'll have to do the extra legwork of converting it, I guess.
I think that's right, but I think all institutions are going to want to benchmark with other institutions. So if they're not able, if they're collecting data in a different way to everybody else, then that's the way we pull them in, isn't it? By saying, if we agree with these definitions, you'll get the benchmarking across the sector. But it's very obvious to me that, when you, even like a definition of a void and an empty room, people will tell you different things about what that is. Is it out for maintenance, all sorts of things. So I think that is something we have to do at the very beginning. I think the other thing on the point about cartel, I'm very clear, we're not discussing rent setting for the future years, because that would be a cartel. What we're doing is looking at what we charged last year or what we charge in the current year. And that the point is, we want to know whether our prices are out of kilter with the sector. But I think that's a very, very important point as well, that people are clear about not discussing future plans, particularly in a period of high inflation.
Yes, just had a conversation about that today. Could be challenging in 23, 24. Jez, you've got your hand up.
Sure. Hi. Thanks for hosting me. So I just wanted to add really to that discussion on definitions. All I would say is probably the earlier you can get a set of definitions out, the better. Because as Elliot says, we may or may not change the way that we handle our data to fit into the Kubo strategy, but you'll give every finance manager a happy smile, because they will at least have the opportunity to have column A adjustment factor and column B. And if basically, the more time you've got ahead of a deadline to get that done, the better. So even if it's not perfect, I think that certainly just putting out a sort of draft. Okay, this is what we're going to say this year, and give everybody the opportunity to at least have a go at trying to manage their data into the Kubo benchmark. And if everybody understands, they know what they've done to get their figure into the right shape, then they may or may not use it as a tool to go back to their own executives and say, actually, this actually looks like a better way of presenting the data, and actually we're going to standardize on that now. So I think it would serve that dual purpose of A, giving them a bit, the FMs a bit of time to do it, and B, maybe a bit of toing and froing on about what the data looks like in the individual institution.
Certainly one of the things on voids is that if you're not running so are you running against 52 weeks of the year voids, or are you running on your contract? Is it contractual voids and expected? And I think that's certainly one of the things, because we all talk about very high occupancy, but the actual occupancy isn't when you're probably on somewhere in the region of 40 weeks for most people. I'm not saying there aren't differences, but it's somewhere around that. But then we've also got 50 week, because we've got postgraduate students. So there is a balance. And they're even better because they're often international students, so they're also paying higher fees. So we love them in particular.
And secondly, I've just got a couple of comments, if this is an appropriate moment, on the survey itself. So, so it's interesting that you're considering using a different provider or a different collection tool, because SurveyMonkey does have its limitations, I feel. So I'd put on my submission that the pages were not indexed, and I don't know what everybody else was doing, but you were farming out certain pages to certain people, and with the best will in the world, they're never going to keep it into a nice, neat order for you, are they? So if they had an originated index on each piece of paper or each sheet of data, then that would be really helpful, because that just helps, again, keep it under control. And the other thing is the navigation between pages in the tool was not great, I have to say. So anything that can sort of be a bit more almost chunkier, I would say, you know, a little bit more blocky to be able to move between the pages. It, I think, would go down well. So that would be just my thoughts on that.
I mean, specifically on that was that I'm a great fan that I preferred it to Excel, but that's a personal thing. But we're aware this was a sort of temporary step in terms of trying to improve where we were. But yeah, absolutely, it was clunky, but we're using the wrong tool, arguably. Well, no, we're using the wrong tool to do data collection of this kind of scale and size.
Sure. Yeah, it was, you know, I certainly understand that. And I must admit, I was highly pleased to see that it wasn't an Excel spreadsheet, because in some respects, the positive side was that it was much more navigable than your average Excel sheet. So, you know, that was a positive for sure. On the questions for sport, there wasn't much delineation between, I mean, we at Essex, we have three major sort of categories of paid income, and that is staff, student, and public. And so the questioning was not, in my view, clear enough to delineate between the two, or you know, we kind of, I wasn't sure what you're after at the end of the day. So just to share that thought. And then 14. Similarly on retail, so I felt that the definition of retail, did it or did it not include food outlets? You know, I wasn't sure. So I can understand. I thought it was me because I'm relatively new into the HE sector on this side of things, and I appreciate now that there's probably other retail outlets and other campuses of, you know, of different sorts, but all that we've really got at Essex now is food. Other sort of types of retail operation have been there but have gone, and certainly the pandemic absolutely killed them off, and now they are no more. So I just stuck in all the food stuff, you know, food retail, because that's all we've got left. But even so, I wasn't 100% that the definition, if I had other stuff in there, was going to cause me some difficulties. So those were my 3 points on the actual form this year.
Your comments on retail are very fair, and retail is horrendously complicated depending on the campus, because different models. I mean, just to say where we are, I have a lot of independent businesses on campus who are actually part of the retail architecture, and actually I make more money out of them because I do rent rather than our own self-delivered. But it's a different type of thing, so it's actually horrendous, and I think it's something that for the future we do really need to think about. And you're right, you know, in a lot of cases, a lot of the traditional, you know, bookshops are gone, you know, lots of things are gone, but there are then new things coming through, and we need, and I think that's quite critical for us, as new ideas come through, we do capture that to share with people, because one of the things that I was talking to Glasgow, went to Glasgow, and their gifts and merchandise is unbelievable. I can't remember what the number was, but it was hundreds of thousands, and so there are some things where these things are really quite critical. And I think that's the difficulty, where you may have things that are really significant in some way. So our tenants on campus are hundreds of thousands of pounds worth of income, but our own internal does okay. So our income is actually external, and we then almost plug the gaps. And it's, so I think it's one that we really do need to think through, because you're right. It's a challenge, to say the least. Accommodation is bad enough, but at least a bed is a bed. I say a bed is a bed is a bed, but you know what I mean. It's not. But at least you know someone's sleeping, and you do understand the basic fundamentals of it. And
to be fair, we had some difficulties with our data, in the sense that COVID-19 had really messed with people's minds, and so delivering food parcels, emergency blanket sets, and tea and pots and kettles to people who were isolating, not under duress, but had no other choice. it just meant that managers were just instructed to make it happen, and therefore where they didn't get very particular about where they charged it to. So we had to do the best we could, but it was I think that over the last couple of years it's probably muddied the waters at Essex a little bit. I mean, I'm on a mission to straighten out of it now, but
we had a joke here that my job title became Director of Charitable Services, not Commercial Services, because handing money back to residences, giving away free food, all these things. And let's be honest, there was a lot of it that was quite fun once you got over the fact that you were hemorrhaging money and no one was going to sack you for it. It was actually, there was a lot of bits which were fun, I have to say, but it was certainly not normal.
Yeah, indeed.
I think the point Joe made about the trends in catering is a really important point as well, is that we understand what others are doing, and what we're losing, like the bookshops, and then where the merchandising is coming in. Something really important we should share on a year-by-year basis. Which, are you saying the more commentary in the form as well, where people can...
Elliot certainly suggested that we somehow do try to capture that.
Right.
And I think that's one of the reasons. The reason why in the past it's not been done, and I'm sort of thinking, is in part because this was done by Cubo. People had full-time jobs who were happy to do some processing, but weren't really, didn't have the time to do the proper analysis, because once she's putting much in the way of open questions, that's why we want to look for a partner to do that with, so that we can really start making some really more meaningful stuff about that. And we just need to be careful and make sure it's the right questions, that you don't end up with data. But I do think that retail is one of those areas. I think your comment on Res Life as well is, I think, another of those areas where we talk about it, but what actually is included in Res Life? What is it? What's its function? I think there's some really interesting things there that will help in terms of that benchmark. As you say, go back to the institution and say, this is about, actually, awful thing to say, this is about retention. This is about actually selling. I mean, particularly, you're in a different situation in London, I'm in Lancaster. For us, it's also about selling the place. It's about bums on seats as well. And in the end, it's a very commercial decision to make sure you've got the best experience, to make sure people, because there are two financial transactions that matter: choosing to come to the institution and choosing to live in our accommodation. Everything else is noise. It's not quite true, but those are the two really big things.
I agree.
I think I'm actually going to have. Sorry, I'm going to have to go because I've got to. Just
Joe, the final point I wanted to make is that often in institutions, the people that keep this data or collect it are not based in the same sections that we are. So at LSE, it's our colleagues in finance. So I think that going forward, we need to make sure we've got the right people in the discussions from the various institutions. So it's not just the heads of service that understand what's going on, but it's the people that collect the data and can give it over when we ask for it.
I think one of the things, just a quick observation on that is when we join FAIRS, I think conversation with BuffDug might be a useful thing to turn around and say in terms of the finance people, that actually says that this is something that's important financially, that therefore begets that. Would be really good. Sorry, I do need to go, unfortunately.
Thanks very much.
Cheers, Joe.
Cheers.
Okay, is there anything else? There's a few things I can give you as prompts that came up in the last one, if anyone, unless there's anything else anyone wants to raise immediately.
Well, I was just thinking off the top of my head there that just agreeing with you, Ian, that it might be worth just sectionizing or categorizing or splitting the data collection a little bit, because that might also alleviate just organizing it on the ground level a little bit. All my accommodation folks are in accommodation, funnily enough, but all my catering are over on catering, so that may also be a thought.
So probably what we would do, Amiel, is actually what you said about it being quite blocky is probably the way we would go. So almost have a front page, it's like a web page. Each section has a kind of button. Each institution would then have its own link, which you could then share with whoever wants it via email. Also, on that front cover page, have the ability to download the full survey in Word format or PDF, because then people can feed it back in Word, or they can just see the context. And I think some of this went, so I've done a fair few of these, and like what tends to happen when you just send people their section, they don't get the wider context. So they're actually putting stuff in there that's already covered elsewhere and things like that. So being able to kind of give them the best of both worlds for how we do it. But I think with that, though, you need something at the end that says, there's a massive process like submit or whatever, and it needs to be signed off by someone and say, yes, I've been through it. It all makes sense. I'm happy with it. Because this year, there was a fair bit of back and forth with institutions, just double checking, which is fine. It's going to happen. But the more we can do to have like clearly defined definitions in there. So one obvious one is what currency you're completing this in. For the institutions in Ireland, if they say euro, well, we can just build in the automatic conversion in, so they can just put it all in euros, but we'll get it in pounds. All that stuff, like little things that will just make the experience easier, and people are having to overly think, which then I guess means we've got a little bit of room to say, but we do need you to use this definition now. Like we've done the legwork for as much as we can, but please try and use this definition, which you've all agreed in a round table. No, sit down. Sorry, I'm bored. But yeah, I don't know. Does that sound broadly like it would align with what you're after, Jez?
Certainly. I think those are all creditable steps forward. Absolutely.
Cool.
What do people feel about the sort of sharing of the raw data? I mean, our kind of incentive to fill this in is that you get the full data, and you agree to share yours as well as part of that. Is that's important, isn't it, to have that access still and to continue to do that? Yeah.
I think so. I haven't looked at it yet because it didn't come with a free 2-hour segment of my life, but if you could arrange that for next year, that would be brilliant. But I would I'd love to sit down and sort of take out my section of data and do a little bit of analysis with it. So I think having the whole data set is very useful. I previously in a different life was doing a similar sort of thing with a group of hospices in the southwest of England, and it was always good to have the full set of data, because then you can always answer awkward questions from your CEO. Always want to know about how they are doing, and not what the average of the sector is.
Do you think there's anything do you think it puts anyone off though? Because obviously we're growing the number of submissions we get every year, but this year was 67, but only really 50 who actually kind of gave us the data, and for some questions only 20. And is there an element where, well, actually, if I just give enough to get the rest of the raw data, I can kind of, that's maybe a devil's advocate to a degree. Is there maybe a middle ground where if you've got to fill it all in to get all the raw data, and if you don't fill it all in, you only get online access to the portal or something? I don't know. Or is that going to just disincentivize people?
I suspect what it is that people just don't have the information ready to fill it in. So they fill in what they know, and then they're scrabbling about for the others, and then they just send it half completed. So I think that's something over time we'll just improve. But I would recommend we start with definitions first, and hopefully will clear things up, improve things.
I think the key for me as well is the easy access for multiple users at the university, and that just listening to the point that Jez made about SurveyMonkey, and it's a bit clunky. You also had people, we had to say to people, if one of you's in, the other one can't be in, and that kind of thing. And that might have put some people off and just thinking, oh, this is just too complicated. I'm not going to know who's accessing it at the moment. So, we learned some interesting things from some people this time. We learned that certain institutions had group meetings. So they took that, the report, the PDF version of the report, and they worked together before they did their input. you know, so they had a meeting at their institution, they got people together. You know, we can suggest different approaches as well to people that might help to encourage that. And the other thing, as you all know, is just where the information sits in universities and how different that is from one university to the next, you know, and whether some people even talk to each other in some instances, you know, across commercial services. So, yeah. I think the idea, just looking at what Danielle said as well, you know, the suggestion that perhaps somebody ultimately signs it off, or, you know, one or two people sign it off at the end, have a quick look through. Yeah, ease of completion, absolutely. And was there anything that anybody felt we just don't need to be collecting? I mean, if we're sort of, you know, if we want to add to this survey to make it more relevant and useful in some ways, do we also want to look at, this is a difficult question to answer because what might not be useful to one would be useful to another, but is there any area that people feel, you know, we don't need to be asking about that?
Actually, I haven't got the answer to that one, but one point I wondered if it might be useful to collect is whether it'd be worthwhile looking at next year some context of energy contracts.
Of what? Sorry, I missed that. Of
energy contracts.
Yeah.
Obviously, cost of living is a bit of a news item at the moment, but I mean, one of the things that we're being protected from at the moment is we're on a pretty lucrative deal, but it runs out next year. So, you know, that is going to have a big impact on a lot of things. So it just might, I mean, whether, you know, other institutions like HESA or BuffDog are also interested in that, but it's certainly going to have an impact on all these commercial operations too, if we double everybody's gas bill tomorrow. And that's, you know, our brokers have indicated that that's what's going to happen. So it's not going to be pretty. So, you know, you might want to be thinking about collecting some data around that point.
It's interesting because in the last session, Jan, I can't remember the lady's name, but she raised waste management as well. So I wonder if there is a utility element.
Yeah, I don't know, without looking back at what exactly is in the ORD estates management report, what they're collecting. I've got it here. I'd have to have a look to see, because we, if there's data already being collected and we can draw that, share that, rather than collect it again, that obviously makes more sense. It just feels like that's maybe in the estates area a bit more, but I might be wrong about that. What do you think, Jez?
No, I'll bow to your wisdom. I'm not, as I say, I'm just relatively new into the sector, so I'm not 100% sure which organisation's collecting which bit. I'm still working out the framework.
Okay, I'll look into that. I'm not sure either exactly what they gather, but you know, we can reference it. We can use it if it's being collected elsewhere. And draw it, you know, and share it, draw it to your attention as well. Anything else? Anyone?
Does anyone have a view on timings, like when the survey is actually administered and when the report is delivered? Does it work as it is, or?
Well, we were actually, just to say, we were later than we intended to be this time. So we intended to gather data in autumn and produce the report in January. That was the intention. So is that a good timeline for most people? That seemed to be the consensus in the previous call, didn't it, Elliot?
Yeah, November, December collects kind of report in January, yeah.
I mean, most people will have their figures by September, won't they? Year end 31st of July, September, and then we report to our council by December in that year, in any year. So I think autumn is the right time.
Right.
Yeah, I agree.
Great.
Great.
Okay.
Thanks very much, everyone. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks
Appreciate
for
all your
input,
time and
everybody.
input, guys.
Yeah.
Thanks
All
for
right,
turning up.
take care. Sorry my camera
Please.
didn't work, but I'll hopefully see you for real at one of these workshops.
We look forward to it. Thank
All right,
you.
take care.
Bye.
Take care.
Bye,
Bye.
everybody.
Bye.
Bye. Elliot, do you want to hang on for us there?
Yeah. Do you want to turn the recording off?
I'm just looking for it.